Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor. Today I'm away from the studio. I'm actually in front of a room full of patriots pouring into people who are ready to fight for faith, family, and freedom in their own communities. It's one of my favorite things I love to do, but I cannot let the day go by without walking with you too. So ahead of time, I sat down and recorded this conversation just for moments like this. I'd love for you to share one concrete thing that you're doing to push back and build something beautiful right where you are. This is part of a movement, and it needs your voice in it.
This is how the Bible also depicts the fall in Genesis 3. Notice the way Eve's inclinations are described. When the woman saw that the tree was good, the Greek is kalos, so it could also be beautiful. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise. Desirable. Note the emphasis on the affections. And interestingly, the affections in relation to wisdom. Wisdom traditionally was understanding that economy of goods, and then virtue is aligning my loves with that economy of goods. Eve was attracted to the fruit. She was drawn to the fruit. The fall came through disordered loves, wherein the woman's affections and inclinations were dislodged from God's wisdom, from God's economy of goods. This is the difference between true beauty and false beauty. True beauty awakens love, and love seeks to surrender itself to the object of its attraction. False beauty awakens lust, and lust seeks to control and dominate the object of its attraction. True beauty attracts, false beauty seduces. It's the difference between the muses and the sirens, right? They both use beauty. One is true because it inspires acts of truth, goodness, and beauty, and thus leads to life. But one is false. And how do we know? It seduces and it sends you where? Down into the depths. And so it's no coincidence how Christ defines the greatest commandment. Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. In other words, the heart of God's commandments is the divine call to love rightly. And we love rightly by ordering our loves in accordance with God's economy of goods. That's virtue. Virtue isn't a checklist. And I could fall into this as a parent. I could fall into that trap very easily. You didn't do this or this or that. That's not virtue. Virtue is not, as Doug Wilson often says this, virtue is not getting your kids to conform to the standard. Virtue is getting your kids to love the standard. Virtue is a properly ordered soul, a soul that loves what's truly lovely, desires what's truly desirable, and therefore experiences the fullness of our human flourishing. Forgive me if I get into a little bit of a political example in the United States, but it was really funny and very noteworthy. I don't know how many of you heard about our Vice President, J.D. Vance, in an interview on Fox News. He was explaining our border policy, and he explained it not in terms of economics or logistics.
What you're seeing right now isn't just another economic cycle. It's a fundamental shift in how the global system is operating. You got central banks buying gold at record levels, de-dollarization accelerating, and markets reacting to geopolitical instability almost in real time. So the signals are there. People see it. But here's the interesting part. Most haven't actually changed anything. There's still in the same position, still fully exposed to the system. They're watching shift. And that's usually where the mistake happens. Not because people don't understand what's going on, but because they assume they've got more time. And historically, that's not how this plays out. So what we're seeing now is more people starting to reposition, not everything, just a portion. And for a lot of them, that means moving into physical gold. Some are doing that directly, just buying gold and holding it. Others are doing it through their retirement accounts, moving part of an IRA or 401k into a gold IRA. That's exactly how I came across Augusta Precious Metals. I wanted to understand how this works in practice. And after looking into it, I'm confident they're the best at what they do. They walk you through everything, step by step, answer your questions, and help you figure out if it actually makes sense for you. There's no pressure around it. If you want to look into it, go to turleybuysgold.com or text Turley to 35052 to get Augusta's free gold IRA guide. That's turleybuysgold.com or text Turley to 35052, because in a moment like this, it's not just about seeing the shift, it's about whether you actually respond to it.
He explained it in terms of ordered loves. I don't know if anyone caught this. Now, given our previous vice president, this was kind of fascinating that we were seeing our vice president talk about ordo amores here. And so it was like, wow, we are in a different world, aren't we? But his argument was a father's first order of duty. He said, we don't lock our doors at night because we hate the people on the outside. We lock our doors at night because we love the people on the inside. So a father's first order of duty is to love his wife and his children, then his neighbor, then his nation, and only then, after the safety of those have been established, can he extend his concern to those beyond his household. Whether one agrees with that application of ordo amores to border policy is totally beside the point. What was stunning is that we're seeing a return of that even among our politicians. They're even talking that way. So something amazing is happening here. This is precisely why C.S. Lewis, the great Oxford medievalist, was so deeply critical of modern secular education. I don't know if you've read the book, The Abolition of Man. It's hard reading, even in the English, very hard reading, because he uses so many Latin phrases and Greek phrases. We would read through it every year at our school. But he wrote it in the early 40s when World War II was raging in the background. He wrote it actually from, he gave the lectures at the university that I graduated from at Durham. And he identified what he believed was the deepest problem of the modern age. For him, it was education. Lewis observed that what made the world modern, what made it different, what separated it from what happened before, was its rejection of what scholars call cosmic piety. This notion, it was everywhere in the ancient world, that the universe was filled with divine meaning and purpose. So in the classical world, everyone understood that because the cosmos was brimming with divine meaning, we were all born into a divine obligation. We were all born into a world of divine obligation. We were all called to conform our lives into a harmonious relationship with that divine meaning and purpose. And that involved cultivating wisdom and virtue. Wisdom and virtue understood the world rightly as a divine economy of goods, and virtue aligned our loves with that economy. What made the modern world modern, according to Lewis, was the absolute rejection of that vision. Enlightenment philosophers deliberately sought to liberate humanity from religion and from tradition by insisting that the universe was meaningless, it was purposeless, it was simply comprised of nothing more than biology, chemistry, and physics. The world was not filled with divine meaning, the world was simply there. And because of our rising technologies, we had the increasing capacity to manipulate the world to conform to us, rather than we to the world. And here is one of Lewis's most profound observations. He argued in the ancient world, the fundamental question of every educated person was, how do I conform my soul to reality? And the answer was through cultivating wisdom and virtue. The soul bows to the cosmos. The soul is trained, shaped, and ordered by its encounter with the true, good, and beautiful. Modern man inverts that. Modern man asks, how do I conform this meaningless world to my own desires and my own ambitions? And the answer involves power and manipulation, particularly through the mechanisms of modern science, modern technology, modern state. So the soul doesn't bow to the cosmos. The cosmos is bent to the appetites of the self. And I need not tell you, in the United States, we were seeing some really weird stuff coming around with that, with flags and celebrating and all. And Lewis identifies a devastating consequence within modern education itself. If you erase the true, the good, and the beautiful as objective values embedded in the cosmos, then you no longer have any eternal values with which to align the human soul. And thus you become incapable of forming virtue. Without those eternal values, we inevitably produce what he called men without chests. Virtue was understood to live in the heart. And virtue, of course, is based on the Latin vir, meaning men. So we were creating virtueless men, men without chests, students filled with mountains of scientific and technological information, but no virtue, no ordered loves, no cultivated hearts, and therefore a society that becomes proportionately disordered. And that's the modern world. This is what makes the recovery of classical education so urgent, so important, and so wonderful. Because the classical renewal is once again awakening in the hearts and minds of students a vision of cosmic piety, a sense of the world is filled with divine meaning and purpose, which then provides the economy of goods, the pattern with which they can align their loves with the eternally true, good, and beautiful, and thus revive a flourishing social order. And it achieves this through the recovery of two great disciplines of formation. So we've spoken about what classical education seeks to achieve, an encounter with the true, the good, and the beautiful. But then the question is, how does it do it? And there are two overall disciplines by which classical educators help the students to encounter the true, good, and beautiful. It's cultivating the moral imagination, and it's redeeming the senses. So you're engaging the entire human person, both mind and body. So with the moral imagination, the ancient world understood knowledge in multiple ways, but there were two primary and complementary modes of knowledge, scientia and theoria. So scientia, we get the word science from it, deals with the problem-solving aspect of knowledge, acquiring skills, practical knowledge of commerce and farming and manufacturing, the skill of learning another language. We Americans don't have that skill. The instrumental knowledge of just how to do things. Absolutely indispensable. We don't live in houses without it. We don't fly in airplanes without it. This is generally what modern education thinks of when it thinks of knowledge, and it stops there at scientia. All of our college majors are different kind of scientia disciplines. But in the ancient world, there was a deeper form of knowledge known as theoria, from which we derive the English word theory, though in the ancient sense it was far deeper. Theoria literally means to behold, to see, but to really see. It means seeing the divine meaning and purpose that's behind all things, inherent in the created order. It was considered the highest form of knowledge because what it did is it integrated all the different disciplines into a coherent whole. So consider how the founders of the Christian university understood this. You know, universities founded in the 10th century by European monasteries. I have to explain this across the pond because they had all the books. And it was founded not to produce professionals. It was founded so as to give students a coherent, comprehensive vision of the unity of all knowledge. That's why it was called the university, unity in diversity. You know, in the States, more and more they're calling it multiversities now because there's nothing to cohere the knowledge. So the math department has nothing to do with the music department, right? And, you know, film has nothing to do with physics or anything like that. The medievalists couldn't understand that. From the medieval point of view, the highest faculty we can develop is what they called contemplation. From the Latin contemplare, meaning thinking thoughts in accordance with a temple. Contemplare. Sacred knowledge. Sanctified knowledge. This is why theology was considered the queen of the sciences, holding everything together. So the moral imagination is precisely what that theory cultivates. It's the imagination's capacity to perceive the divinely infused meaning of the cosmos through every subject. And that's what we as classical educators are doing. We're not merely teaching our students to see the curriculum, right? Math, language, whatever. We want them to see through the curriculum. We want the curriculum to be like glasses to see the world anew. So they see the world in exciting ways through literature and through music and through science and through the humanities and so forth. And when classical students do that, all of a sudden the world opens up in amazing ways. So when classical students study mathematics, they're not merely solving equations. They've got to do that, sure. But they're discovering the eternal ratios and proportionalities that structure reality, which for the ancients were the same as the harmonies that you can hear in the music. As a matter of fact, Kepler's astronomy, he was fascinated with music. And if I recall, it was Kepler who discovered the elliptical movements of planets. So elliptical is not a circle, it's like an oval, like this. And a planet might, if it's farther away from the sun, it comes around slower. And if it comes on the other side, it's closer to the sun, it comes around faster. And then he created ratios from that, like a 1:2 or 2:3. And then he developed a music theory from that. And so, what would the intervals sound like if you create, and the harmonies sound like if you created the combination of these ratios. The first composer to put Kepler's universe into sound was Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. So one of the things I've done is I've played some Bach for my students who say, you hear that? Are you guys studying Kepler in science? That's Kepler's universe. That's what it sounds like. That's the way they were able to bring things together. When you study literature, you're not merely studying plot and character. You're learning to see through the stories to understand the story we're all in. Shakespeare's tragedies represent the fall. His comedies represent our redemption. Sleeping Beauty is a story about a Christ Redeemer who slays the dragon and raises his beloved to life. Pinocchio is a story about regeneration and transfiguration, hardened wood of sin transformed into true humanity through acts of love and selflessness. This is what the moral imagination does. It sees through the surface of things to the divine meaning behind and below everything. And it's not just the mind that classical education reorients, it's the whole body as well. One of the most profound insights of the classical Christian tradition in particular is that the fall didn't merely disorder the soul. Our bodily senses were disordered as well. Our sight, our hearing, our very capacity for experiencing beauty, all of it was fractured by sin. So all of it needs to experience redemption. And so this is the classical doctrine of the redemption of the senses or restoration of the senses. It's the purpose of great art, great architecture, great music. It's not there just merely to entertain or to impress. It does that. It's wonderful to do that. But it's there to retrain our senses, to sanctify them, to redirect them away from the carnal and toward the eternally true, good, and beautiful. Think about how we just talked a little bit about how the ancient world understood music. They didn't think of music the way we tend to. We think of music that is something that's performed for entertainment and so forth. Again, it's fine. But music for the ancients was just more profound than that. Music was a mathematical discipline. The study of the symmetrical relationships between the sounds was part of the quadrivium, right? The arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the sum total of those symmetrical relations, going all the way back to Pythagoras, 500 BC, was a metaphor for the cosmic chain of harmonies that holds the whole universe together. It's called the music of the spheres. And Pythagoras believed that by tapping into those harmonies, we could reproduce on earth the cosmic symphony that holds the entire universe together and hence transform into heavenly beings. Pythagoras was cool. He was a neat mystic. Augustine wrote in his De Musica that God is music. And what he meant by that is God is perfect symmetry, perfect proportionality, perfect harmony, perfect number. When God spoke creation into existence, Augustine believed the form itself was music. The entire chain of created being is sustained at its depth by divine symphony. So think of how Tolkien, if you've ever read the Silmarillion, he has all of Middle Earth created through song. C.S. Lewis in The Magician's Nephew tells us that Aslan sang Narnia into being. So when our students are trained in music and in art and in poetry and in architecture, they're not merely acquiring cultural sophistication. They sure are, but more than that, they're participating in anticipations of the complete and total transfiguration of the cosmos, including our own bodies, in our resurrected glory in the fullness of the new creation when Christ returns. I want to finish with a quote from the English literary critic John Ruskin, writing in 1866. The true end of education is not only to make the young learned, but to make them love learning. Not only to make them industrious, but to make them love industry. Not only to make them virtuous, but to make them love virtue. Not only to make them just, but to make them hunger and thirst after justice. This is what the return of classical education is all about. Not information, not credentials, not compliance, all great stuff. But ultimately, it's all empty if it doesn't have love. Rightly ordered loves. So here's just what I want us to sort of hold on to as we break and then return for our second session, when we actually look at the structure of the kind of new Christendom that's rising and how we can use that with our students. When we look at particularly, and again, I just have to tell you, I mean, this is, as you could tell from probably from my lecture here, I do love beauty. My first degree was in music. And so when I come here in Budapest, I'm just like, I mean, I know I'm not in New York anymore. I mean, this is unbelievable. But I look around and I see the glorious cathedrals. I see the castle. I see the whole Haussmann program of civic restoration. Unbelievable stuff. This is what you're doing with your students. I'm absolutely convinced of this. You can reconstitute the architecture of a civilization, but without reconstituting the hearts, the souls, the love of that civilization, it'll all be for naught. There'll be empty buildings in the end. Budapest is declaring in its buildings Budapest is declaring in its buildings that it refuses to forget what it is. You're declaring in your schools that you refuse to raise a generation that forgets. The cathedral and the classroom are one project. And in our next session, I want to show you how large that project has become, not just here in Hungary, but across the entire Christian world. Something extraordinary is happening. You're right at the heart of it. God bless.
Gang, if you're proud of what you and I are standing for here, don't keep it hidden. Every time you step out in Turley Talks gear, you send a clear message about faith, family, and freedom, and you help keep this channel going strong. Your support lets us keep speaking truth and building this movement. Scan the QR code, check out the merch store, and gear up with something that tells the world exactly which side you're on.